Happy Independence Day to our American friends. Traditionally, the episode this week is a bonus episode, which is a little bit different every season. This year, Stacy is recuperating well from surgery, and I can't seem to leave her alone for more than a couple days. So we decided to chat about a longtime interest of mine. She can mostly lay back, relax, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
In today's episode, Daniel and I discuss the post-war housing boom and some of the mid-century era solutions to housing a new generation of American families. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder.
And I'm Daniel Cantor.
And this is True Tales from Old Houses. Hey, Daniel.
Hello, Stacy. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm good. Nice to see you again, as always.
Yeah, you too. I don't think that I knew that you had a sort of a long-term interest in post-war housing, and I'm kind of excited to hear you talk about it. But before we launch into it, I do want to say thank you to our Season 9 sponsors, the Craftsman Store, Sutherland Wells, Preservan, and Abitron. We could not do this show or any show without them. So thank you so much to those 4 sponsors.
Yes, we love our sponsors, and you will too.
We do have a couple of announcements too. Do you want to tell the people what they are?
Oh, sure. This is the very last week to enter the 100th episode giveaways. They close on Friday, July 7th at midnight. For the giveaways, we are offering 1 free enrollment in the window course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. Thank you, Scott. A woodworker sample kit from Sutherland Wells. Thank you to them. A liquid wood and wood epox restoration kit from Abitron. Stacy and I love those products and swear by them. And a True Tales from Old Houses hoodie or t-shirt of your choice.
Exactly. And you can enter those giveaways at truetalesfromoldhouses.com/giveaway singular. And you may enter 1 giveaway or all 4. We won't judge. Just do what your heart tells you.
With this and always.
We look forward to giving those items away. We'll make the announcements on the July 17th episode, which is our 100th episode. So excited.
100 triple digits is where we're headed.
It is. Wow.
In addition, I have to remind you to please join my mother over in the ratings and review section of your favorite podcasting app of choice. You can feel free to give us 5 stars and say some nice words, and we would sure appreciate it. We're always tickled by new ratings and reviews. It helps boost us in the rankings, let other people know that this podcast is worth playing, and thank you for doing it.
And Mom, if you're listening, Daniel's mother has already left a review telling us how much she likes Daniel. So I would really appreciate it if you would reciprocate and tell the people how much you like me. So Daniel, what have you been up to?
Oh, stuff and things. So Brad and I have wrapped up a lot of the major work on the lake house, and now we're sort of trying to remember what it is to be in a relationship and not just be working on a house all the time. So instead, we've gone to look at other houses because I think that's what old house nerd kind of people do. So a couple of weeks ago, I took him to the Round Lake Methodist Camp. I know you guys talked about it in his interview, but real quick refresher. The lake house that I'm always talking about renovating with my boyfriend Brad is in a Methodist camp, which was sort of this wackadoo thing in the Second Great Awakening where these religious communities sort of popped up as places for a certain brand of religion to go and be together and hear preachers and ministers, and I'm not sure what they call it for Methodists.
Well, and to be clear, it's not a Methodist camp anymore. Silver Lake Institute is. And it was a Methodist camp, right? Or is it still considered a Methodist camp?
So, I'm the wrong person to ask, but my understanding is that actually very recently they essentially stopped being like a religious community, in part because that precludes them from applying to a lot of grants to have, repairs and maintenance done on some of their big projects. And so it does still, largely carry the culture a bit. For instance, there's no like drinking on the docks. You're not supposed to have alcohol outside of your home.
Interesting.
And there's still kind of this very communal vibe. They do community breakfasts on the weekend. And a lot of the families that are there have owned the houses often for generations. Typically, those people are Methodists or were raised Methodist. So it's a heavily Methodist community. Two of our best friends down the street are both retired Methodist ministers. So anyway, it definitely carries that legacy.
So I got us on a little tangent here, and I'm sorry. So tell me about Round Lake Methodist Camp, because you just went there, right? Or Round Top?
Round Lake. Round Top is something else. That's familiar. It's like isn't that a national park or something?
Is that like a Texas antique show or something? I don't know.
Look it up yourself.
We'll just make it up. Yeah.
It's something. Those two words have been put together. Yeah. So we went 2 weeks ago, Round Lake, which is a different Methodist camp up a little bit north of Albany. For the first time in like 20 years, they did a kind of open house tour. So people could volunteer to open up their cottages to the public and allow people to walk through. And somebody hit me to it on Instagram. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but I was like, well, I gotta take my boyfriend who's passionate about these second great awakening era religious communities, very specific. I gotta take him to see this once in a 2-decade thing. So we went and we walked through, probably 15-ish houses.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
It's the same kind of era. So very like gingerbready, adorable, different brands of Victorian houses. And most people, I guess, live there full time, whereas Brad's place is very 3-season oriented. And so, yeah, it was beautiful, really cool to see what people have done with their houses and just see a different community that was the same kind of thing. I did not know about any of this until Brad bought his place. So learning about these religious communities from that period has just been fascinating and fun to learn about. And then we went to Chautauqua last weekend.
Right, Chautauqua. And you and I have that in common. I mean, I've been to Chautauqua too. It's a really cool, but it's beautiful. Not Methodist. Like, as far as I know right now, there's a religious component to it, but it's very non-denominational. In fact, all across the property, there's buildings like the Methodist house, the Presbyterian house, the Catholic house. There's all different religions. The whole vibe they want is for everyone of all religions to come. And then they end up having, I think, a church service every Sunday with a non-denominational person giving the service. They really try hard to be inclusive, even though just by nature, those types of communities end up being a little homogenous anyway.
Yeah, totally. I definitely got that sense when we were there. And so it's much, much bigger than the Silver Lake Institute, much wealthier. There's a lot of kind of amenities. That there's an active hotel, at least one. And yeah, there's just a lot more kind of going on, I think, at Chautauqua. But yeah, it's a really fun place to take a day visit. And then where I really want to go, have you heard of Lilydale?
I have. Very special place. Share with everyone.
Well, so my understanding, I haven't been there, is it's around the same era, but the Methodists were by no means the only ones doing this thing of creating these planned communities. And so there is one called Lilydale that is a spiritualist community. So spiritualism is this big kind of religious movement in late Victorian times. And in order to buy a house there, you have to go through, I think, 3 different tests to confirm that you have the gift and, can commune with the dead and stuff like that. So to this very day, you go, I guess you can buy a day pass and you can book a reading with any number of mediums.
Oh, we should do this, Daniel.
We
should
have
go.
to. Well, did I tell you about Brad and I talked to a psychic a couple of weeks ago? Did I tell you this?
No.
Okay, I gotta tell you real fast. A friend of ours is from California, and in true sort of LA fashion, she has a psychic on speed dial on her phone. And
of course,
so she's
naturally.
so she was hanging out at the lake with us and was like, we gotta talk to my psychic about, I don't know, about the house, I guess. And she set up a time and we call her. It's this 80-year-old woman, Veronica, who can do a reading over the phone. And I don't know how you feel. I'm not 100% on board, but I sure do like it.
So what did she say?
So she started by kind of talking about us as people. And actually I felt pretty perceptive, which was fascinating. And then she was like, what do you want to know? And it was a very brief conversation. We had just sort of hung the last pieces of art. We're a little delirious. And I'm like, okay, so we just did all of this work over the past year on this house. And I'm wondering if there are lingering energies and how they feel about the work that we've done. I, of course, want her to say, yes, like, they're thrilled. And you have this whole script already written. And she goes, yeah, so I am seeing a man, probably based on his clothing, I'd say right before the turn of the century, if I had to guess. And I'm seeing that his name is Ned or Ted, and he's pissed. And I'm just like, oh no. So
what have you done, Daniel? What have you and Brad done?
And I have to say, it was the weirdest thing because the night before and the night before that, so we're like laying in bed, we're so tired, it's super late. And Brad's like, do you hear that? It sounds like there's water running. And we were literally so tired that we were just like, no, there's no way. And just like went to sleep. Next morning, the bathroom sink is just running at full blast. And this happened 2 days in a row. So this seems weird. So Brad is like, is he turning the water on? And she was like, yep, that could definitely be him. And, he's really, really upset. He's really angry. And we're like, but why? The relief, I guess, is that according to Veronica, basically, it doesn't sound like he's mad at what we did with the house, but she was a little non-committal about that. She said that he was mostly mad about something that happened a long, long time ago, and she felt like he maybe lost the house, like it was, taken from him in some way, or that like kind of the trajectory of the community wasn't going in the way that he wanted it to. So I don't know. And so I very sheepishly was like, how can I make him not hate us? And she was like, well, talk to him like he's a person. You can tell him that you love the house and you want him to have peace and these kinds of things. And so that night I totally had like a private moment with Ned/Ted/Ed in the living room and was like, told him these things and could you please not run the water in the middle of the night? And the sink has behaved ever since. So maybe Ned and I are on good terms now. I'm not sure.
Wow.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah, that's a really fun thing that you did. I'm glad that you did that because you mentioned that you aren't necessarily a full believer, but you think it's fun. And I would say I agree with that. I'm not necessarily going to change my life based on the outcome of a conversation, but I would absolutely be into knowing that kind of information. Mm-hmm. I think that's neat.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, it was fun. So we have some research now to do, and I feel that part of that research should be going to Lilydale and consulting another medium and seeing if they say anything remotely similar. And by the way, there's a documentary called Nobody Dies in Lilydale that was produced by HBO, I think in like 2004 or something. And it is not on HBO, but it is on YouTube, and it's real fun.
I'll try to link it and put it in the show notes. That would be fun. All right. Well, we have to take a short break. You ready?
Yeah.
We will be back to talk about post-war housing and more. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by the Craftsman Store, another excellent resource from our friend Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. The Craftsman Store is your go-to place for old house tools and supplies.
Our friend Scott has taken the hassle out of tracking down the many specialized old house supplies that we need, put them all in one place for us in this cozy little online hardware store. It's full of books, tools, replacement parts, and more.
One of the reasons why I like shopping from the Craftsman Store so much is that I think shipping is just as fast as an online retailer. The customer service is a real human. You can go on there and interact with a person about what you're looking for, and they can help you right then.
So from window restoration to plaster repair, they have everything you need to do the job like a pro. Check it out today at thecraftsmanstore.com and save 10% on your orders if you use the code TRUETALES.
True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Preservan, a unique preservation franchise opportunity developed by longtime window restoration pro Ty McBride. The mission of Preservan is to save the future by preserving the past.
So what exactly is Preservan, Stacy?
We have talked about this all season, and I know you know, Daniel, but I'm going to tell everybody else. Preservan is a preservation franchise for wood rot repair in buildings old or new. Ty started Preservan in Oklahoma, and now you can open a Preservan franchise anywhere in the U.S. As a franchise owner, the team at Preservan will train and equip you with the tools you need to perform sustainable wood rot repairs and build your own team of epoxy techs.
You will receive the playbook for a proven preservation business, exclusive access to Everresin epoxy products, and all of the business software, marketing, advertising, training, and technical support that you need to be successful with your franchise.
The Preservan family is focused on creating work-life balance while serving your neighbors and community in a recession-proof industry, because those are values that Ty holds dear, and he wants you to be able to work your own hours and spend the rest of your time in ways that are meaningful to you.
To learn more about becoming a part of the Preservan family and their mission, go to Preservan franchise. That's PRESERVAN, preservanfranchise.com/truetales.
We are back.
We're back.
I have a little something to admit. Before we met Rebecca Hunter, I knew very little about kit houses. I knew about the general idea of them, I guess, but I didn't really realize when they were available and how long they were available. And I was especially kind of interested in what killed the kit house, because it seems like it would be a pretty good idea. Cut everything somewhere else, send it on a pallet. And I don't know, it seems like it could still work today. But there were different types of housing that became available. And I know that you know a lot more about that. And I hope that you can share that with us today.
All right. Well, I'll do my best. I also learned a lot in that episode. And I agree. I feel like pre-cut homes specifically, would be something that makes total sense. I've done one new construction project, and just the framing alone, the amount of waste that you have with the lumber is kind of crazy. So I don't know. I'm interested. If I had any money, I'd invest in pre-cut homes.
I feel like this is something that Costco could do. Don't you think? Like a Costco home. Doesn't that seem like something you'd buy at Costco?
I mean, I actually saw, I think Home Depot now offers basically an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, that you can buy for I don't know, $50,000 or something. Anyway, and I heard rumor a long time ago that IKEA was putting out a kit house as well, but I'm not sure if that ever happened.
Do you have to put it all together with Allen wrenches and things?
I think you do, yeah. And it's designed to perfectly fit the PAX wardrobe system and stuff. I don't know. I love IKEA.
Well, what came after? Because you know something. We've talked a little bit just at the beginning of the show. We were talking about, kind of planned communities and things like that. And then I kind of have this big blank spot between old houses and then suburban houses, because I grew up in a government house. That's really all I know. I have a big blank spot, but I know there were other ways of building post-war. So what's up?
Definitely having that interview made me sort of think about this stuff again that I hadn't really thought about in a long time. And I think what is so fascinating about the 20th century broadly, but specifically this post-war period, is that we kind of built the same way for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, these new innovations come in. So I feel like the first round of that is like those mail order houses. And then in the post-war period, as Americans, we could foresee this kind of major issue of where are all of these returning GIs going to live and start their families and, continue the prosperous American economy. And so there were all these really, really interesting things that happened at that time. And a lot of them were not all that successful.
Like what?
I was actually reading recently, somebody sent it to me, about Lustron homes. Lustron? Lustron. Let's go with Lustron. So this was a really interesting thing. In 1932, the federal government created a program called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and they basically gave loans to a lot of things, including businesses that were sort of focused on these issues of how we're going to build and, do other stuff for the American economy. And so they basically invested in this company called Lustron that created prefabricated houses that were basically made out of enameled steel. And the idea was that this was for the modern space age American family that was tired of painting and maintaining their house of plaster and wood. And this was this hyper sanitary, new, amazing thing that was going to completely change the culture. And it didn't at all. I mean, it was there, it existed, but they shut down in 1950. They were not able to repay the loans to the government, and so they shut down. So there were a lot of things like that. And a lot of them were related actually originally to housing soldiers and other military personnel during the war, and then sort of trickled into other areas of the culture.
So I have to ask you a question. Are there still Lustron homes?
Yes, there are.
All right. To the listeners, if you're living in one of those homes or you know someone who is, that would be a fun episode in the future.
Yes, it really would. They're so cool and weird on the inside because I think this is the one that the walls are enameled steel.
Well, let us know via the contact form right on truetales.oldhouses.com because I think that would be a great episode. Anyway, I didn't mean to stop your flow.
No. That would be so cool.
Lustron was a bust. What else?
There's another really famous moment in post-war culture that was out in California. So there was a magazine called Arts and Architecture Magazine, and it was headed by an editor named John Intenza. And he had this idea in, I think, 1945 to start what they called the case study program. And they basically recruited all of the kind of biggest names in design at the time. And so there's Eros Saarinen and Richard Neutra, and maybe most famously Charles and Ray Eames. So you know Charles and Ray Eames. You're, I think, sitting on one of their chairs right now, as am I. Are you in the green chair?
I'm not in the green chair, but yes, the green chair is just out of view here. Yes.
Okay. So did you know that chair, the fiberglass material that makes that chair, was actually developed by the Eameses during World War II? They were hired by the U.S. military, and the fiberglass was sort of this innovation that allowed them to make lightweight, like helmets. And I believe it was used for certain aircrafts as well.
It's probably no surprise to you that I had no idea, but thank you. Now I do. That's very neat. Fun fact.
It has a real place in history. And so the Eameses were this multi-talented design duo. Often people think they were brothers because the wife's name was Ray, but they were a husband and wife. And they designed tons and tons of mid-century furniture, which is probably what they're most famous for. But they also designed a house as part of the Case Study House program. Theirs is Case Study House number 8. It still stands. It's a house museum in the Pacific Palisades outside of LA. And the assignment of this program was to create the house of tomorrow, the house that, we're all going to be building in this next decade. And so most of the designs involved a lot of steel and glass and concrete and readily available, at least in the Eames case. They used what they called off-the-shelf steel products from steel fabricators that were, in theory, easy to get and generally used for commercial purposes. Now, in theory, I say because it did take them 3 years between when they designed the house and when they actually built the house because of supply shortages due to the war, lack of steel, and so they had to wait. But they built this really beautiful house. My understanding is that it went up in a matter of like 2 weeks. They built the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
And then they moved in December of 1949, and they both remained there until their deaths. And then I think in like 2006 or so, it became a house museum. So it's this really, really cool project. It is absolutely beautiful. And it may surprise nobody that that style didn't really take off, certainly not on the mass scale that was intended. And so they used essentially the house's steel, glass, and what they called cemesto panels, which were, I think, also developed for the military. Basically, it's like, some of us have this in our houses. I did. It's like a cellulose board, kind of like Homosote. And then the outer coating is a fiber cement, which of course has asbestos in it. And they were developed basically to be able to build a house with a very kind of minimal framing. And then these panels would slide in and create like essentially the structure of the wall.
Right.
So I think those things are just interesting as like the cultural context of what was happening in design on the sort of like cutting, more fashionable edge.
Sure.
With the intention being that these were going to be accessible dwellings for the average American, but it didn't work.
Did the average American not like them, or were they just out of their price range, just too out there, or both?
My understanding is that that was a big part of it. It just didn't really agree with the American taste. And like we see this in all kinds of eras of design where Americans are very comfortable with things that feel familiar and safe and traditional. We have a very traditional aesthetic as a country. And so this very modern box, essentially, that's being built in the late 40s, most Americans are like, that looks like an office. It looks cold. It doesn't look like a home. And especially at a time when all of these soldiers are returning home and just want that like sense of, I don't know, familiarity. It didn't work at all. And I think there was, on top of that, it was the supply issues. On top of that, it was just, this huge shift in the way that we thought about residential construction. And so it didn't really take off.
Well, that didn't fly, but it does sound like it got people thinking.
It did. Or it, I think, provided a contrast to the things that actually did take off. And so one of those that I've just been fascinated with for a long time is the Levittown communities. Do you know about these?
Well, when I knew we were going to talk about Levittown, I did a little cursory research. But no, the answer is no. I don't know enough to even have a basic conversation about it. So I'm hoping that you'll tell us, and I'm sure that I'll have questions that you can answer.
All right, so here's the deal. So in the late 40s, there's a developer named William Levitt, and he has a company called Levitt and Sons. And he buys acres and acres and acres and acres of potato farm in Nassau County, Long Island. And he's going to build an entire community. So I should recognize this early on. This was the late 40s in a very racist country. And so these homes in this community were not available to African American buyers. And I think I believe Jewish people were banned from buying there. So my ancestors would not have been able to live in Levittown.
Honestly, whenever I did some research on Levittown, that was one of the first things I saw. And I was like, okay. I'm going to let Daniel tell us more.
I remember researching this a lot when I was like in high school and college. And I remember that always sort of being a footnote. And so I was really interested and encouraged to see that like that's now in like pretty much the first line of the Wikipedia page about Levittown. Like it's being recognized Thank goodness. And so it wasn't just the deed covenants, as far as I understand. It was also the FHA and the VA that were offering mortgage products that would not lend to Black people or other minorities.
And did I read that they didn't actually do lending to Black people or other people of color until like the early 1970s? Am I just like completely out of touch? Because I think that I read that.
I think that is true. I mean, it never should have happened, but it went on for way too long and, is a pretty appalling part of our history. That being said, Levittown and places like it have a really unique spot in American history that I think is still worth talking about and exploring. One of the things that's really interesting about it is we talked a little bit in Rebecca's episode about how the mail order houses very much followed sort of the predominant fashion of the time, right? So people are building Dutch colonials. Now they figure out how to make it a kit. Whereas I feel like the Levittown houses sort of invented almost a new style to suit the construction that was needed to build them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
They buy all this land, plan an entire city that is also a suburb. This is kind of the beginning of the suburb. And so divide them up into these streets and cul-de-sacs, and there's kind of community centers in the middle of these neighborhoods, and they begin to build houses. And so to do that efficiently, William Levitt took the model from Ford, Henry Ford's production assembly line style, and applied that to building. So to produce an entire house, there were 27 individual steps that were taken on by in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 men. They were men.
Of course.
Of course.
We were home taking care of the children, so it's fine. I get it.
Or at that time, could have been working in a factory or, that happened too.
The other job we had.
Right. And they had to do a couple of things to make it really fast. So as far as I know, they changed the building code in Long Island to allow for slab construction. So prior to that, you would have needed a crawl space or basement. They were allowed to build on slabs. And so in the course of a day, they could put together an entire house with 36 men and 27 steps and build an entire house. And I think at their height, they were building about 40 houses a day.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that crazy?
And this was to house people post-war? Like they wanted to create a place for soldiers to come back to? Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. So there's tens of thousands of returning GIs, these young men that, are going to be starting families, and where are they all going to live? So you see these communities pop up, and basically they need to house a lot of people, and they need to be constructed really fast, and they need to be affordable to purchase. So the first Levittown house sold for $7,900, which in today's money, I looked up, is about $100,000. So, pretty affordable for your younger person, especially if they're getting fairly low interest government loans. These houses, they're built on slabs, they're wood frame construction, they're basically a ranch style or a cape style. They had several different models. And within the first 3 hours, they sold 1,400 of these houses, which seems like so many.
How many total were there?
I think I read, if I'm interpreting the data correctly, that in Levittown, New York, there were 17,000 houses, which housed about 84,000 people. So,
oh my gosh. So was Levittown, New York, the only community?
No, it was not. There was a Levittown, Pennsylvania. There was, I believe, one in Maryland. There was one in Puerto Rico. I think there were like 6 or 7 total Levittowns. But the New York State one was first. And I went there. Is that a cliffhanger?
That is a cliffhanger. That is the perfect place to take a break. And I want to hear about your experience visiting Levittown. So we will be back.
Okay.
True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Sutherland Wells. All of Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil, which is native to China, has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone.
In contrast to polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood, so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, which makes it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills.
I've used several of Sutherland Wells products. I use Clarabelle's mixed with my oil primer, and it works really great when I'm doing window restoration. They have a brand new product coming out this summer. It's not available yet, but it's just a few weeks away, and it is called, love this name, Slicky Wicky.
It's the best name.
It just makes you giggle, doesn't it?
It really does.
Slicky Wicky is a tung oil and wax product that you put in the jam, and it helps your sash go up and down. That'll be available this summer, and Sutherland Wells already has an entire product line for whatever you're working on right now. Siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it.
To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, sutherlandwells.com. And to save 10% on your first order, use the coupon code TRUETALES. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Abitron, which is now a division of UC Coatings.
Abitron manufactures two of my very favorite products, liquid wood and wood epox, and I have a very funny story to share with you really quickly. I actually did a repair this week with wood epox and liquid wood on my friend's mother-in-law's house. And as I was taking the wood away to add the liquid wood and wood epox, she said, "Did you find my plastic bag yet?" And I said, "Wait. Your what?" It turns out she had stuffed a plastic bag in there, which I carefully pulled out and then, of course, administered liquid wood and wood epox in its place. By the way, I share that story with permission. Liquid wood and wood epox make permanent, cost-effective repairs wherever you find rotted or damaged wood. No plastic bags required. And whether you are a first-timer or a professional tradesperson, Abitron products are super easy to use. The instructions are simple and the results are exceptional. There's no shrinking or sagging, and repairs can be sanded and painted just like wood.
And in addition to wood repair, Abitron also offers other great products for old homes, specifically for concrete repair, plaster repair, window glazing, and more.
Check out their website at abitron.com or follow them on Instagram at abitron_UC or on Facebook at Abitron, a division of UC Coatings.
From now until July 7th, Abitron has a special coupon code for True Tales from Old Houses listeners. Enter WORK10 at abitron.com for 10% off of your order. That's WORK10 to save 10% on your order at abitron.com.
And we're back. Before the break, you were telling us that you visited Levittown. I must know more.
I did. I was a really weird teenager, surprising probably nobody. So I was like deeply obsessed with Levittown. I don't know why. I think I really loved just the 1950s aesthetically. Culturally, I could probably do without, but aesthetically, it was a very cool time. I love everything from like mid-century modern to just kind of mid-century kitsch. And Levittown was sort of kitschy. So before I even went, I was interested enough that I remember going on eBay and buying a couple of issues of what they called Thousand Lanes magazine. And I'm really bummed because I don't know where I put them, but they actually published a home magazine, sort of like, I don't know, Better Homes and Gardens or House Beautiful, that was specifically geared toward these Levittown homes. And so if you owned a cape, here is all the different ideas that you could make a built-in or make a window valance or I don't know, whatever. And it was like for the housewives of Levittown.
Let me see if I understand. So this was a magazine that was put out during the heyday of Levittown, not a modern magazine for people.
No, this was like how to make your new Levittown house your own. Because one of the criticisms, of course, so we all know that song, Little Boxes on the Hills. I think if I sing less than 3 seconds, we don't have to clear it.
Oh, ticky-tacky?
Little Boxes made of ticky-tacky, yeah. So that, I think, actually was based on a planned community in California, if I'm not mistaken, but it was all the same era. And so these are little boxes made of ticky-tacky. They were very small, and very basic because they had to be built so quickly. So this magazine comes about as a way to sort of inspire, this is before Pinterest and everything, obviously, to inspire housewives to make their Levittown house their own and not just like every other neighbor's house, which I thought was really cool.
And you bought the magazines.
I bought the magazines. I hung out with them in my teenage bedroom and flipped through. And I don't really remember the contents of the magazine. I do remember the ads because so many cigarettes. And like, I remember there were ads for like Sprite, but it was marketed as a mixer for your hard liquor. Anyway, fun stuff like that.
It was the 50s after all.
For your lunch cocktail. So I'm a big fan of all of this for some reason. And my friend Eliza, she was a big vintage clothing aficionado at the time. She had very good taste and wore a lot of like cute little 50s like shift dresses and stuff. And so we were both really sort of enamored, I think, just with the aesthetic of the whole thing. And so we hopped in my car. I remember my mom being like, oh, because it was a long drive. We hopped in my little Volkswagen Jetta and we drove to Levittown, New York, just for the day, just to check it out.
Did you take pictures?
I did take pictures. I guess you can have one for the show note. I have full on like Justin Bieber hair. I look ridiculous, but I thought I was dressing in like period costume somehow. And it was so strange because in our minds, it was going to be like a weird time capsule and we were sort of traveling back to the 50s. And in reality, it's just a suburb in Long Island. And so we went to like a restaurant for lunch and we told them that we just came to see Levittown. And I just remember them being like, right, but why? And we were like, well, it's this really cool history. And I probably do a shorter version of this podcast. And they're like, okay. I mean, they just could not care less about any of it. It was just like the kind of whatever suburb that they grew up in or were from or whatever. But it was really, really interesting too to see. This would have been 2007, I think. So about 60 years since the first houses became available. And so it was a short enough amount of time that some of the original owners were still there. And so it was this really interesting thing where you'd go around to these streets and almost every house had gotten at least one addition and probably new siding. And, you know, they'd been treated like a normal house and added on, changed by their owners. And then you'd stumble upon one that had like 2 perfectly manicured yew bushes in the front and a green lawn still and a white picket fence. This is all what every house had, was a green lawn and a white picket fence. And it would just be like this perfectly preserved little time capsule.
Wow.
So I think we have a picture of me and Eliza like standing in front of a couple of those. And
I would love to see that.
yeah, it was, you can decide whether to post it or not. I'll send it to you. But
I'll post it.
I found, I guess, that it was this really interesting sort of exaggerated version of what we all go through with our old houses that have seen changes over the years and attempts to modernize and sort of that, apologies if this is too big, but that human spirit of wanting to make your home your own. And so even though I didn't love most of the renovations that people had done, I was a snob even then. It was just really cool to see all of the different ways that people had reimagined these essentially identical houses that had very little in the way of character and very little in the way of personalization. I don't know. It's just a weird day I had when I was 17. I don't know.
No, that's great. I learned a bunch. I had no idea about Levittown and that there were other communities, I guess. When did the Levittown community idea fizzle? Do you know?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, to some extent, I don't think it did. I mean, we still build like tract communities all over the place all the time. And it's not all that different. In my recollection, Levittown houses were not, I don't think, built with like pre-constructed panels. And I could be wrong about that. I think that's a small difference in a lot of the newer communities that pop up where all the houses are sort of similar and stuff. They'll bring in prefabricated, like, whole components of the building. But otherwise, we still see vestiges of it. I think modern houses tend to be a lot bigger when they're newly constructed. But I think it's just a really interesting moment of all of these like really innovative and fascinating and cool ideas are happening, and people are developing them, and businesses are developing them, and the federal government is backing their development, and they all kind of fail except for like the most boring one that came out on top. But it was what people wanted. People wanted this colonial revival-ish little ranch house that just felt traditional and comfortable. And so that's the American aesthetic, I think, to this day.
Well, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for soldiering through that. That's what I remember. I'm sure there's more. There's a lot of interesting resources out there about this topic. So if any of that was interesting, you go seek those out. I'm not the authority. I just remember it. And I've always just felt like it was really interesting. I still do.
And before we end today, I just want to remind everyone who's listening, we mentioned it earlier, if you have a Lustron house or a connection to someone in a Lustron house, let us know.
Yes. Or similar things like that. We would love to know about them.
Anything that fits in this framework of post-war houses that are meant to create a solution, I guess. Would that be a good way of putting it?
I think so. Another one I'd be super interested to talk to someone about is a Quonset hut house. You ever seen those?
Oh, totally.
It's like a half of a barrel. They're super cool.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. All right. So I guess that's where we end for today.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for letting me just talk about a thing I like.
We loved it. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. To continue the conversation, join us on Facebook and Instagram at True Tales from Old Houses. And you can follow me at Blake Hill House on Instagram and Daniel Cantor at Daniel Cantor.
And to learn more about everything we discussed in today's bonus episode or request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. We hope you have a lovely holiday.
Until next time.
See you on the mini.